Thanks, Jeff. Hey, welcome everybody. It is the holidays. We wanted to have an opportunity to say hi to you and say happy holiday to everybody on the call. From Data On and everybody here. So happy to see a lot of familiar names and faces. Hopefully, we wish your family have good health and happy holidays. We want to do this webinar because we just all came back from Ignite. And there was a lot of interesting and good announcement that Microsoft shared with the entire audience. And we're very, very fortunate and happy that we have Ellen Kirby here today from Microsoft to share with us all the exciting news that Microsoft announced, especially the fact that they changed the name again. I told everybody that every 3 years Microsoft wants to change the name, and this is coming up 3 years for Azure Stack HCI, formerly known. Now the name is called Azure Local. As you see, all the t-shirt that we have. Today's conversation will be about the new announcement from Microsoft Azure Local, share with you. At the same time, have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Ellen Kirby should know everything about Azure Local and Microsoft, and she's not shy of sharing whatever she's on her mind. Yeah, so feel free to raise your hand, speak up. This is very informal, as you know, for all our webinar. We're here to have a conversation, but I will introduce Ellen, and she could talk, and she'll probably share a couple of slides and talk about it. Then we'll open for discussion. Go ahead, Ellen.
Guys, as Howard was so lovely in his introduction, again, my name's Ellen Kirby. I'm a Principal Product Manager Lead on Azure Edge and Platform. So that includes Azure Local, AKS, that includes all of the componentry for Arc agent tree to be able to manage and deploy from Azure Arc, and as well as some of the OT functions that we've actually folded into this broader concept of an adaptive cloud, which includes the new Azure IoT operations as well. So I'm part of the product group that is building all of those different types of technologies. So we're very grateful to have you guys all here today. Either using Azure Stack HCI, interested in it, or looking to move toward Azure Local as a new experience. So what I thought I would do is not bore you guys to death with a ton of slides. I'm not a big slideshow person, but I do have a couple that are pretty on point with kind of what we announced at Ignite. I'll go through them relatively quickly. We can diverge off these anytime you guys want and have the use of time be with whatever we want to ultimately do. And for some reason, I am only getting the control to move forward on the slides. I don't know why I have like no control. Oh, here it comes. Finally. All right. It just was taking a second to load. So again, one thing we try to do when we talk about these technologies is kind of get everybody on the same page of what does it mean to be hybrid? What does it mean to have an adaptive cloud? Because different people use those technologies and the namings of those technologies in a lot of different ways. So when I talk to different customers, I find that the feedback I get on what they're trying to accomplish with these technologies, with the remaining workloads that need to stay on premise, and then having a management control plane that would give them the flexibility to be able to have a similar experience managing the on-prem solutions and the cloud-based solutions. Sometimes it's a little gray and murky when you talk about a cloud native application, or you talk about the need to keep specific legacy, traditional, data sovereign types of solutions still on-prem. What I have found is most customers, unless they're brand spanking new and just built everything up in the cloud, have a pretty substantial amount of estate that needs to stay on-prem. So we're aware of that, and we're continuing to try to find the best ways to utilize all the different types of capabilities that we're building into Azure and extend those services on-prem. So what I really wanted to do with the couple minutes is kind of talk to you guys about what that means from an adaptive cloud approach. We want to be unified and customizable. We want to have a global to local infrastructure. We want that look and feel from scale deployment, from AI management tooling, from data unification, to have a experience very similar to cloud as on-prem. Now, those of you who have run Azure Stack HCI know that that is not 100% there today. So what I wanted to do is kind of show you the work that we're doing to make this more and more of a reality. Make sense? Any questions, Howard?
Nope, that sounds great. And again, guys, if you have any questions, raise your hand or talk, and we're happy to answer. Go ahead.
Yep. So Azure Local. what are we doing here? So we're creating this cloud connected infrastructure and control plane by using Azure Arc and having that Arc enabled agent tree that goes all the way down to the metal with an Azure Local solution. And what we're really trying to do is get away from that very restrictive naming reference of Azure Stack HCI, because by name alone, we're referring to it as only hyper-converged infrastructure at that point. So of course, today, Azure Local is essentially a rebranding of Azure Stack HCI, but it opens the door for us to actually scale in either direction the types of technologies that would be included in an Azure Local experience. So that can be a much smaller solution or potentially down the road a much larger solution. So that's kind of the why. And again, working with the great folks at Data On, you guys can pick and choose the hardware that's right for you and then have a lot more flexibility. So we're looking at things like being able to run on a very small scale solution or being able to run on a really big platform like multiple rack servers. So those are the things based off of the feedback we've heard from customers that we need to look at. Marketing slide, I'm going to move past it, but we do have a really great footprint in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So why the new product name? We wanted to not be limited to this being a data center solution or an edge solution or just a server solution or just a connected solution or just a hyper-converged solution, and not even being just a Windows solution. By moving the name and by changing all of this, we can actually really expand the portfolio of different types of capabilities that we keep under the covers of an Azure Local experience. So think as we evolve past it being running on just the Windows kernel, and think about potentially leveraging other kernels that we've brought to market with things like the Linux Mariner image we use for AKS. So we're really trying to figure out how do we help customers go super small and super big and still maintain that really great experience in the middle of a hyper-converged solution. So again, not limited to those things, but giving us the capability to extend what we mean by Arc managed infrastructure. So here you go. You guys are all aware of this. Azure Local connects to the cloud. It gives you a cloud consistent experience to deploy virtual machines and Kubernetes applications. It gives you the ability to do all of the levels of management and security and operate everything like you would an Azure cloud experience, but running it on-prem with Azure Local. And just so that you guys can see, we do have this Azure Local replacing Azure Stack HCI in the naming convention. But again, that gives us a lot of really interesting things. So again, we moving forward are going to be looking at lower spec, lower cost edge server solutions that will be available in the catalog. So you'll be able to go and filter by Data On, and you'll be able to see as they add new solutions in place for these kinds of needs. And we also have a preview so that early next year we'll be announcing and fully supporting disconnected operations. That will be primarily for specific use cases, especially in government, where you need to be fully air gapped. This is going to give you essentially a appliance version of your Arc experience on-prem so that you could run an entire estate of Azure Local without having to be ever connected to the cloud. So on our original release of disconnected operations, it's going to be an all or nothing. Either you're running a traditional connection or you're running a fully air-gapped solution. But you can see where we're thinking as we think 2 to 3 years down the road at potentials for this Arc control plane to potentially provide a break glass kind of experience. Those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. We're not saying, hey, we're going to do this 100% yet, but we're looking for feedback from customers from like you guys as to, does this make sense to you? Does this work in your environment? Are these the kinds of things that you're looking for when it comes to how we are involving these technologies, and listening to customers who say, we can't just do this all with that limited amount of requirements that you gave us with Azure Stack HCI. So again, there's a lot of out-of-the-box operations that we announced, a lot of new stuff in terms of being able to manage and deploy from cloud. So we're backing this up where you can do this with automation, whether that's a interactive experience or that's something that you can templatize and use our infrastructure as code, or even do some deployments with things like Terraform to be able to take advantage of treating those physical machines like cloud resources. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of steps along the way of figuring out where it actually makes sense to lean in on a cloud control plane, where we can still provide that level of power and support that you want locally in your environment. So that's kind of where we're thinking in terms of that stuff. So we're thinking about things like infrastructure as code, and how do we help you do a repeatable solution where you can spec out your specific deployments, and then you can automate those so that they're different in different scenarios. We also have things like the Azure Update Manager, which now fully supports an Azure Local experience and allows you the capability to manage and deploy all of the workloads themselves, and also update those workloads and the infrastructure that the Azure Local is running on. So think about things like the benefit that you get of being data on versus the stuff that you see here with Apex, Cloud, and Lenovo is that you guys are actually getting a lot of this premier offering without the cost associated with it, because that's one of the things that Data On is doing. They're creating a solution that allows you to get all of those special benefits without necessarily the price tag that we typically see with a lot of the other offerings out there. So again, we're adding more visibility across your location. We've added a lot more into our dashboarding experience, but all of that is, again, fully customizable. So we've created some dashboards for you, and then you can add different other dashboards. We've come up with our standard metrics of infrastructure so that those standard metrics and all of the reporting that comes up into the Azure Log Analytics workspace, and then subsequently that you can interact with, is all part of what we're continuing to add into that value of what makes Azure Local a unique experience compared to why wouldn't you just run Windows Server 2025 and run that as the hypervisor in your environment? These are the kinds of things that kind of create that, that differential. So one last topic I'll hit before we kind of start opening it up and see what kind of conversations we have is we've really put a lot of effort into making it possible for you to do turnkey deployments of virtual machines and containerized applications from your edge experience in the control plane. So when you're in Azure Arc and you want to deploy virtual machines or deploy specific Kubernetes applications, you can be really flexible with it. That's something that you can't do when you're doing it as an IaaS resource in the cloud, because you're limited to a specific subset of skills. Of SKUs. So for us, when we're looking at, what does a customer need to run at the edge, often they're a lot more required to be customizable because of the types of workloads that inherently need to live at the edge. So being able to run those and upload your own images, or you choose from the Azure Marketplace images, opens us up to a lot more capabilities with Azure Marketplace. So we expect to see more third-party solutions showing up in the Azure Marketplace that you'd be able to just select, hey, I want to run that, and deploy it down onto your Azure Local ecosystem. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about when we're thinking about scale and ease of adoption. So another one that I think is really important to talk about is the work that we've been doing with Azure Migrate. This has been going on for a very long time. Some of you may have actually tried this out and tested it. We are very confident that this will GA sometime in the first half of next year. I say that, my fingers crossed, I do a little dance. I'm really hopeful that that's where we're going to land. There is a link in here for the trying out the public preview. If you've not already done that, there is a list of things that we're still working on from a bug fix perspective in the public preview documentation. But essentially, we want to give you a no cost way to move your VMware estate to an Azure Local experience. And what took a really, really long time is Azure Migrate was the right tool for the job, but it initially would have required that all those workloads move up into Azure and then be brought back down. And of course, we don't want to do that. We don't want customers paying ingress egress. We don't want that extra complexity. We want you to be able to have a localized replication. So that's what took a pretty substantial amount of time to get up and running and working in a way where we feel comfortable releasing that out and having customers depend on it to migrate their workloads from VMware to Azure Local. But the good news is it's just about complete. And I'm very, very hopeful that we'll see this GA during the first half of next year. And I did already talk a little about the Kubernetes, but I did want to hit on something really big that I don't know that everybody saw. It's included. So initially, Azure Kubernetes Service, or AKS, running on top of Azure Stack HCI had an additional cost associated with it unless you were leveraging hybrid benefits. Now, because we make it part of the solution because it runs on top of that resource bridge, which then allows you to deploy your Kubernetes applications with AKS, we've built that into the actual cost. So whether you're using a pay-as-you-go model or hybrid benefits, you can run your Kubernetes workloads that's included in your Azure Local experience. So we think that was a really big deal. That was actually a pretty good fight to get that one done with our business planning desk, because sometimes that's hard to tell them we want to give this away for free. They don't see that as being a good idea, you can probably imagine. But I think there were a lot of us that were really adamant that this is a critical thing for our customers to be able to do, and that the ability to then enable things and tools like Defender and policy and being able to use Entra ID on your Kubernetes applications in a native experience is so much more critical than having some kind of a baseline charge for cores and vCores and pCores on an Azure Kubernetes service. So we've, again, included that now into your entire Azure Local cost. So I'll probably go ahead and finish with this slide unless anybody else has any particular things that they want me to drill into specifically. But we've really banked on this idea of you're going to pick an awesome infrastructure with data on, and you're going to want to run that in a stable and reliable way, which is what they're bringing to you. And what we're really trying to do is give you this power of Azure Arc to run your very traditional workloads like virtual desktop or Windows or Linux VMs. Also be able to run really interesting things like app services, logic apps, and functions. Also being able to run a traditional SQL server that's been Arc enabled and gives you all that benefit of being able to manage from edge, or even up-level that into a managed instance of SQL. We're also really bringing some very interesting things coming down the road in being able to run video indexing and machine learning at the edge as well. We're thinking next steps about how we integrate Copilot into, for example, the data that we're collecting in Azure Monitor that's in that log analytics workspace. Can we do interesting things to make that more predictive so that you know when you're having any kind of issues in your environment and can get that information from a service that's actually monitoring it with the power of AI? Those are the things that we're thinking about, that's that differential in the value add of the solution. So I do obviously have, I don't want to bore everybody with slides. I'd love to have more of a conversation, but I did want to at least tell you guys a little bit about some of the announcements we made at Ignite and kind of talk through why we named it Azure Local and why we think that's an important distinction and kind of line in the sand where we can really branch out on the types of infrastructure we can support under that brand of Azure Local. So what kind of questions do people have?
I have a lot, but I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but I need to start with a couple high-level ones, if you don't mind.
Of course.
My job is to talk to customer and introduce Microsoft and the solution to customer. And of the 50 people on the call, probably I would say a good 30% are potential new customers. I see. Mm-hmm. You talking to a customer, what are the impetus that's driving people to look at Microsoft Azure Local? Is it what are the workloads? What are the reasons? Can you share some of your knowledge and talking to customer why they're coming?
Yeah, there are a couple pretty big reasons. I can tell you all of the ones that we say at Microsoft. Oh, it's because there's all this buy-in to the cloud, and most companies are very cloud first. So this now gives you the ability to extend the functions of the cloud on-prem. I think that's a very valuable reason to choose the solution, but it's not the reason people are coming to the solution. One of the biggest reasons people are coming to the solution is because they're looking at costs associated with their VMware estate and they're realizing it's not sustainable and they're looking at alternatives. But what I love is that although a lot of the conversations I have can start with that, and they were happening right, left, and center when we were at Ignite a few weeks ago, they can start with that. But what I always find fascinating is when you actually kind of peel it back and say, what are you actually trying to accomplish in that location, whether it's a data center or it's a manufacturing facility or it's a super lightweight edge deployment? What are your goals? Is it scale management and deployment? Is it zero touch provisioning and more of a turnkey experience? Like, what are you trying to accomplish in terms of how you can manage these solutions? And then what are you running on top of it? The most critical thing, because I think we've all done this for decades where you get to an end of a hardware or you get to an impetus from your business that whatever you're using is too expensive and now we have to look for something else. that it can be a challenge to figure out where to go with that. And I think understanding where you want to be from a workload perspective, are you moving toward a cloud native offering? And what I think is unique about Azure Local is it gives you the capability to start deploying the types of workloads that most businesses are leaning toward, that are more app level resilient, as opposed to relying on a lot of the intricacies of an infrastructure level, and are moving toward a containerized application. And when you see that, what I've noticed is that customers that need to continue to run those handful of traditional VM workloads, and then also have the ability to start deploying those containerized applications, as either they're building them internally or they're starting to hear from their third-party solutions that they now have a containerized offering. We're seeing this huge pivot toward, well, we've got to do these things. We know some of them need to stay on-prem. What do we do? And we think we provide you a really interesting way to accomplish all of those things and end up with an experience that emulates being up in Azure, so that your DevOps teams don't care. They don't care what they're deploying to where. All they're getting is that same Azure experience that they get if they go in there and spin up a machine or deploy a container. We want to give you that kind of an experience, but give you the flexibility to pick and choose the infrastructure that you want underneath. So it's an interesting time, because I know a huge amount of my conversations start with the VMware concerns, but they end with how do you want to move forward for the next 5 or 10 years, and where are you trying to get to with your technologies?
Seems to me a big driver for the last, I would say, half a year from a lot of net new customer has been the workload of VDI. I know AVD is a new workload for Azure Local, and clearly there's quite a bit of people on the call here that has experienced it. What advancement has Microsoft done with AVD to support Azure Local that will continue to help customer have an option compared to a Citrix and Horizon to run VDI on-prem on Azure Local?
Yeah, we've actually been continuing to add more capabilities to Azure Virtual Desktop. There are some really interesting partnerships that have occurred as a result of the decision to be made to extend Azure Virtual Desktop down exclusively to what was Azure Stack HCI and is now Azure Local. In that you have an Azure Virtual Desktop team that initially was very hesitant to do it, because they said, hey, everything we do up in the cloud. It's easy. We can control all of this. And we give customers a lot of flexibility without having to have any of the support and management challenges of you running your own infrastructure. And I think what's been interesting over the last 3+ years is seeing the evolution of thought there, that yes, customers are running AVDs in the cloud, but we have a huge amount of customers that are challenged with the fact that they can't run those workloads up in the cloud. There's too many different variables that make it extremely difficult to run those workloads on-prem. So what I think has been probably the most exciting thing, at least from where I sit, is how much more invested the Azure Virtual Desktop team is into Azure Local being as close to an Azure experience as possible when it comes to managing and deploying AVDs. So when we first started the conversations with them, it was going to be so bare minimum. It was going to be so limited on what you could do with Azure Virtual Desktop. And what I'm finding is if you're a customer who's overlaying some type of a third-party investment like a Nerdio, and you're running these things, I'm seeing people do some really impressive things with these solutions, given the fact that, you then have that control over the cluster that is actually going to be running all of those workloads. So I think the thing I'm most excited about when it comes to Azure Virtual Desktop is they're hearing feedback from folks like Ryan and the team at Baptist Health. They're hearing feedback from a variety of different customers, and they're saying, oh, yeah, we actually do need to do those things. And I'm excited that we continue to add more and more capabilities and value to the solution without adjusting any of the cost points associated with it.
Hey, Jeff, I can't see the question mark, so I let them do questions and have a lot more questions. Go ahead.
Yep.
Whoever raised their hand, just go ahead.
Looks like Jared.
Yeah. So we start talking about roadmaps. So, use us for an example, and there's probably a lot of other customers. What on the roadmap is there any integration for customers to use existing storage systems with Azure? Right.
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we talk about internally a lot because we get that ask. And I can't come out and tell you guys by next year we're going to do X or Y. But what I can tell you is it's no longer called Azure Stack HCI, and there's a reason for that. And that gives us a lot of capability to think about where customers are and meet them a little bit closer to a brownfield scenario than what we have today. Today, Greenfield is the way to go when you're doing Azure Local. That's where we are. That's where the catalog is. That's where Howard and the team will be absolutely happy to talk to you guys about the right configurations of hardware, because we all believe very strongly in the capabilities of a hyper-converged infrastructure. But we also recognize that that's not going to solve for every customer. So that is something we are absolutely exploring. I would say by the time we're doing this wrap-up call from Ignite next year, it's going to be a much different scenario in terms of the portfolio of capabilities underneath Azure Local.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And this topic actually came up yesterday with a customer too. As soon as I said, at this point, it's not supporting SAN, they got really disappointed. So I didn't know what to say. But hopefully the next time, a year from now, conversation also. Okay, next one, just speak up. Lucas.
Yep, looks like Lucas.
Lucas?
Is there going to be any standardization for Azure commands to Azure local commands, as well as, kind of standardized log analytics for out-of-the-box work?
There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I mean, from a standardization standpoint, there's always going to be work that's going to need to be done. We're continuing to drive toward as close to parity as we can. But like, for example, if you are running 22H2 and you update to 23H2 and then Azure Local, of course, an upgraded machine is not identical to a net new deployment of Azure Local at this point, because there are some variances that we're continuing to work on. Our goal is to get all of that as standardized as we can, so it can be as seamless an experience as possible. But I also definitely feel the pain when it comes to, there are certain functions and capabilities that are going to be available in Azure that won't be available to Azure Local, at least right away. What we're really trying to do is listen very closely to the customers that come up with the scenarios. Hey, this works in Azure and does it this way, and we want it to work in Azure Local the same way. And we try to really determine where the value is of that and how we can help you get there. So that's where we start looking at things. And that's where one of my big responsibilities on our team is to help our product group as a whole determine what order we're going to add new features and functions. Because as you guys can imagine, we get hundreds of different things that customers would like to see in the product. And we have, semesters that we work on building and adding new features and functions to the product. And we can work on a dozen for the hundreds that we get asked. So it's so critical to us to understand where are the big problems, where are the big challenges, and how do we continue to improve the product? And we're continuing to invest in that. We have just brought in another huge group of development team folks. And there is so much commitment to look at this and say, how do we actually move faster and do more, which is crazy when you think of how quickly we're evolving this product with updates every, 3 months. But yes, I hear exactly what you're saying, Lucas. I know that that's a pain point. And, that is certainly one of those things that when you get that and when you kind of run across something where you're like, man, this works in Azure and it does not work on Azure Local, that's a great thing to put. We've got that Tech Hub community. We all look at that. We all keep an eye on what people are posting there. Always a good idea to let the data on team know they are not afraid to come chewing on me if it's something big and important. So, we want to listen to you guys. We want to do the best we can to make parity, but it's going to take us a while to get to that.
Question for 2025, or I'm going to go with the server core 2025. Yep. When is the Azure
Local? Yeah, the update for Azure Local is scheduled. So remember, Azure Local is now updated 4 times a year. So it has the servicing updates every month, just like any other technology where it gets its security patches and things like that. But the main servicing updates for the solution are 4 times a year at this point. So we just dropped the November release. So the next slated release is February. The one after that would be May. What we are currently planning in terms of what we're doing internally is for the backbone of Azure Local to be updated to Windows Server 2025 with the February release. That could slip to May. It really just depends on whether or not it looks good and it meets all the requirements and our partners like Data On are all comfortable with it when it gets released, because we have to be super careful about making sure we don't do anything impactful to our customer base. So Currently, we are slated for it to update in February, but it is very possible it will move to May if we don't feel 100% confident that that update is exactly what we expect it to be.
And another question I have would be, I've heard through some support channels that the goal is to take all of Windows Admin Center type of items and get that natively in the cloud without having to connect through that.
Yes.
Even I know roadmaps can change, dates can do that, but what is the target goal to kind of just get us a seamless experience to not have kind of two management consoles, one that connects through Windows Admin Center and one that you just do everything through the Azure portal?
In terms of being able to do 100% everything, I think it will take us multiple years. In terms of being able to do really most of the day-to-day critical operations, we're very driven to get that to a point where by this time next year, we feel very confident that you wouldn't have to have necessarily a localized solution in place except for break glass. But that is something that's interesting because like I did an analysis not that long ago where I interviewed a bunch of different customers, got feedback from a bunch of different customers around what are the RSAT type tools that you still require utilizing today running in this environment? Where are the gaps and challenges? And so I provided a readout to Daniel Lee, who is the product team lead for the Arc management experience for Azure Local. And it was really interesting because here I went marching in there like all these things. And he was like, oh, we are totally 100% aware of all those things. Thank you for reminding us that we need all of those things. And it was very eye-opening for me to see that they were already down that path. Like they knew, they were very aware that there are things that are still missing that require you to use Windows Admin Center or System Center Virtual Machine Manager or Hyper-V Manager. And that's what we're really looking at is the day-to-day operations and how we can actually make it to get to a point where 90+% of what you do is in Azure Arc, and there's a few remaining highly customized things that would potentially need to continue to use some of the RSAT tooling.
And I'll keep going unless anyone else wants to.
You have the floor unless someone cut you off. Keep on
going. Would you say the biggest pain point right now that customers are facing is, I'll go with I think one of the slides said a one-click update, but I'm going with you click it, you do it, and then it successfully updates. Because I would say the majority of we have 3 clusters deployed, and I'd say the likelihood of them succeeding with just telling it to install without a retry or a restart of a service and a retry. I mean, thankfully, they've all been kind of rock solid as in terms of still keeping production loads up and stuff. Mm-hmm. But would you say the update process is basically the biggest pain point that what you guys see on items, or is there something that we're thankfully not experiencing?
Yeah. I think the update can be very, it's a challenging point right now because updates behave differently depending on the type of hardware that you're running, depending on the type of how long it's been since you've run the update, what version you're going to from what version. There's a lot of nuance to doing an update and to say, we're going to do it as a one-click update. The big thing that we've really tried to build into it is some recovery capabilities so that if it does have timeouts or problems, it retries everything and doesn't hopefully get you back to the starting point. But like Thomas Roninger and the team that's responsible for updates and deployments from that perspective, when you talk to them about it, they're keenly aware of the fact that updates don't always work 100% the way we expect them to, and it will probably take another year or two to get everybody at minimum Azure Local level so that we're not running into the challenge points of gear that was retroactively running into a problem because we didn't think about you went from 20 to 21 to 22 to Azure Local, and then an update causes you some kind of a problem because that base architecture and the update isn't the same as the net new build. So there's a lot of parts that move when it comes to Update Manager that we continue to try to mature on and become more and more stable. But being able to pick it up and continue on with an update, even if it doesn't go right and it has to retry, especially from a cloud deployment, I think those are really big things that we're focused on. I think when it comes to anything cloud, it's been an interesting thing to have to think about. one of the ones that I think is the biggest pain point, much more than Update Manager, is currently the ability for Arc-enabled workloads to be migrated around from cluster to cluster, which does not exist today. So if I were going to put what's the biggest thing I'm looking forward to next year, like on my Santa list that I'm really excited about, it's the hydration function that's coming to an Arc-enabled server, so that you'd be able to easily take an Arc-enabled VM and move it from different clusters in your ecosystem in different locations. I think that's critical. That's something that should have very likely had been available before we ever went to cloud deployment, but you learn a lot when you push cloud deployment really quickly. So that to me is probably the biggest #1 pain point, is the way that Arc-enabled machines behave in terms of, if you wanted to take an Arc-enabled machine from cluster A and move it to cluster B right now, you'd essentially have to uninstall Arc and reinstall Arc and reconnect it and all that kind of stuff. And it's not sustainable. So the things that we're building that allow that kind of migration is probably one of the biggest pain points I see right now in running these solutions, and the one that I'm most excited about us getting resolved the first part of next year.
It's great you say that, because that topic definitely had come up with many customers. Many of the customers here today have multiple clusters, and a lot of customers want the ability to kind of, I guess, make sure everything's balanced, right? And that feature being Arc is a challenge. You could do that today without Arc VM with System Center Manager, but with Arc VM, there's a lot of challenge. So I'm glad that you guys understand this is a challenge. I understand it's in preview today, or private preview?
It is in a private preview right now. We expect it to go to public preview in February.
Got it. Thank you. Good one.
There's a lot of good stuff in February, because there's the 25 update, Windows Server 2025 update. There's the hydration. There's also the another big one that's coming in February is the public preview for the new software-defined networking capabilities that start to allow you to do all the network security group stuff from the cloud interface. That thing is really cool. We're in a private preview for that right now, and it's really, like, I think it's a game changer when it comes to how you would actually really manage and use software-defined networking in an integrated experience, because it's always felt bolt-on, and this is the first time it feels native and just part of the overall solution. So I'm super excited about that one. So I think February is going to be a really cool drop. I'm really looking forward to the changes in it.
Awesome.
It looks like, Lucas, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I got a couple things speaking on balance. Is the VM migration logs, are those included in the log analytics workspace, or are those buried somewhere else?
No, they're in the log analytics workspace.
Okay. And is there anywhere that it's documented kind of the top to bottom behaviors with the VM migration in Windows?
So
like in terms of the hypervisor interacting in the guest OS to move around, what it does at the guest OS level as well as the hypervisor level?
So I'm not sure about the native VM itself, but I know that by Arc enabling it, you get a lot of additional capabilities in terms of how you would look at logging. It's certainly something we can follow up with you on, Lucas. I'd be happy to check on that.
Thank you.
I'll have to open my my lab and move some stuff around and look at where it's putting that information, and then confirm that with with Thomas and the back end team to just make sure we have all the places. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. But I think when you start talking about the thing I like the most about when we talk about Arc enabling stuff, whether you're Arc enabling on top of other solutions or you are getting an Arc enabled solution natively with Azure Local, we're really trying to move that agent to be sort of like the one ring that rules them all, in the sense that you don't have to go back in and put another agent on there for patching, and another agent on there for monitoring, and another agent on there for updating, and another agent on there for policy. It's building all of that stuff in, so it allows you the ability to consume those services.
Well, so the reason I'm asking for kind of the deep dive there is we're just seeing some odd behaviors with VMs rebooting with no errors, and it seems like it's during migrations.
That's interesting. I would definitely open a CSS case on that.
Yeah.
And if you haven't already, let them have that information, because what they'll do is they'll open a case and then they'll put in an ICM for us. So we'll get all your logs and all that information, because it escalates up to the product team. So if you can open a case, that would be awesome. And that would help us get the information from that team that we need to understand what's going on.
All right.
Lucas, Okay. So I have a question more on support response. Actually, maybe just split support response time. It seems like a lot of issues that when they are opened up, there's some threshold it must cross where it needs to go to the product team, and then that's where it kind of the foot's off the throttle at that point, and it takes might be days to push something through or get a response. Now, thankfully, again, in our environment, like I said, everything seems to normally still progress and work, and production workloads stay up, but it's one of those things where where do you, and I don't know how closely you're in on the support side, but is there a plan to improve the response and have more of that first level group be able to handle more items as opposed to kicking almost everything to the product group?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually been a big bit of feedback we've gotten. It was probably the most common bit of feedback I heard from customers using the solution when I was on the floor at Ignite. And it's something that I actually heard customers say to the face of the gentleman that owns the entire solution all the way from the top down. And there were a lot of, okay, this needs to be evaluated. So they take that stuff really seriously in our senior leadership. And that's one of the active efforts right now, is to evaluate where we can build out some of those skills on the CSS team so that we're able to support more and more of these things coming in. I think the other thing, and this will be my Cosmos Darwin answer of the day, is that this has been super rapid, just how we have evolved from what we've been doing for decades when it comes to running on-prem infrastructure, running failover cluster manager, and troubleshooting all of the componentry of that. Most of us were pretty good at handling that. And then we added in February of this year, this deployment solution and this cloud control plane. And in it is inherent challenges and complexity and things that we're seeing show up, especially because there is still a lot of work effort happening to get a lot of parity of information in the control plane in the cloud versus what you would have on premise. So you have to be very careful. Where I've seen a lot of things cause issue is something gets moved around by the back end and the front end isn't aware of it because those things aren't communicating properly. And we have to try to solve for a lot of that. And it's a very new thing to have to solve for compared to how we've always troubleshot a hyper-converged infrastructure since, the Storage Spaces Direct 2016 release. And our CSS team is really having to learn a new subset of skills in terms of how they understand how Arc plays, how all the control plane management works. And so that's one of the bits of feedback that we absolutely got. It was very constructive, and I think it's really led to an understanding of there needs to be a broader knowledge in our support team to handle a lot of these like cloud and especially Azure Arc related challenges, and it not be an isolated infrastructure team and an Arc team that you then deal with. Or we're back in the same boat we were in the Windows Server days where you called for support with Windows Server and it took you forever to get to a Storage Spaces Direct person.
One maybe more of a statement or request is if you have somebody that you could help connect us with. We have a Microsoft Premier case, but when we try to do Premier engagements, a lot of times they're not, I would say, up to date on like Azure Local as an example. So when we're trying to do like log analytics, they might know log analytics as of 3 years ago, and we start talking about on-premise VMs. So it would be great to be able to connect or talk to somebody even for like a 30-minute, 1 hour session just to say, here's some things you can do in log analytics from start to finish. Or maybe that's a future data on webinar to, help get somebody that just is tightly connected with log analytics and Azure Local and be able to kind of show you create the space, you can quickly create these items that are, maybe some of those common metrics, because those standard few that come with the cluster and few that like out of the box, like probably would be great to be able to expand past that. But it just doesn't seem like Premier is caught up yet to this.
No, fair point. And I know a lot of our education and resource materials go into what we've been building with the Jumpstart community. I do want to make sure I shamelessly plug it before the call ends, because it's so critical to where we keep that most current information and the most current scenarios for you to test and validate and get that experience. And in fact, there is some stuff in there that delves into what happens in the log analytics workspace and how it all works. But it's not just your Azure Local experience in there. It's everything. It's how you do Arc and how you manage different types of workloads across all these different locations, including other cloud providers. It includes things like running IoT-based operations and being able to kind of understand and set expectation from the types of applications that you might need to run. We've even got scenarios in there where you can basically spin up like a manufacturing facility or a retail facility, and we emulate what that whole experience would look like. And it's all done within your Azure subscription in a virtual architecture, but it gives you that feel so that when you're then starting to look at the things that you can build and actually do in real life with data on, you have a good understanding of what you can and what's available to do within the solutions. I think that, that's a great place to go and actually kind of get some really good real time. There's also an amazing community associated with the Jumpstart. So we've released this badging program where you can earn badges and certifications within Jumpstart, and being a specialist on helping other folks do things like build infrastructure as code deployments. And there's all kinds of really neat stuff within that community that I highly recommend you guys take a look at, because they're another great resource for, hey, I really want to do some interesting and different things with my monitoring solution. Is anybody else trying to do these things with these metrics? And you're likely going to get an answer from, because all the MVPs are in there. There's a pretty big community of folks. I think it's in the thousands at this point of different people that are interacting with and leveraging that community. And I would say that would be a really great place to go now that we've kind of gotten away from this being a little niche solution to a rather big need that we're seeing globally. It's definitely something we're going to continue to invest in and add more capabilities. But to your earlier point, I think, if that was something that there was some interest for, I'm sure we could work with Howard. There's some really great people on the team that build our solution points into Azure Monitor and Log Analytics Workspace, and could probably help answer some really interesting questions, since they're always moving and making changes to the solution.
And last thing I want to say, since everyone was nice enough to allow me to ask all my questions, I just want to say, I've had, for anyone else that may be new on the call or something, I've had a great experience working with data on, and we've came through and moved a lot through that private preview of the VMware. Hundreds of machines we migrated very successfully. So just want to say there's a lot of good work going in, and a lot of great support that we've had for this product. So thank you to all the people that are helped make that happen.
And Todd, I'm sure I'll point out a lot of new customers to you as well, because one of the incredible things about this community is I'm not shy of introducing customer to help customers, because that's the only way for us to continue to solve problems. So when we have issues, we look to customer who's actually more knowledgeable, that has solution to solve the problem, because we know we don't know all the answers, and a lot of customers are very knowledgeable like yourself. So please continue to trust that we'll continue to push hard as we can to do this. And Alan, you're incredible for being on. There's a lot of new topic that came up, and I hope next year we'll get you back sometime to answer more questions, and maybe after that the release that you're excited about, we'll talk about that as well. But definitely an exciting time for all of us. We're definitely seeing incredible momentum, but we have to keep on trying our best to help the customer to solve problems. That's our job. So we'll continue to do that. Any more pressing question on the call that we didn't get to? Okay. If not, have an awesome holiday. Stay safe. Spend time with the family, and you too, Alan, and I'll see you guys all and talk to you guys all next year.